Okay, so now we'll go on to talking about discipline versus punishment, and we'll start this off with a situation. So, your child refuses to eat the healthy dinner you spent hours making for the family. What do? A. Force them to eat it. B. Hit them or threaten to hit them if they don't listen. C. Let them go hungry, but leave a plate for them in case they change their mind later. And D. If you don't eat it, you'll lie down next to it. So though the wording might sound a little harsh, D is actually the best answer out of the options. This is because it's closest to discipline and that the child must learn from natural consequences. That is, if you refuse to eat, you will naturally end up hungry, not so? Of course, this option is only appropriate assuming the child is not starving or malnourished in some way. This is merely a very basic example of a natural consequence, not necessarily a one-to-one comparison to a real-life situation. It depends on the child and the parent. So, think of all of these options now and ask yourself which of these is punishment and which of these is actually discipline. So, discipline versus punishment. The real difference there is, and yes, there is a difference, is in the difference between teaching and inflicting suffering. The intent of punishment is to inflict pain for an offense. The intent of discipline is to train and bring about order. By punishing our children, we inflict pain, physical or emotional, with no greater goal. By disciplining our children, our greater goal is to teach them. Punishment is about controlling the child, rather than teaching the child how to control themselves. And most often, punishment changes the way the child thinks about himself. A child who endures serious punishment may actually start to think, I'm bad, instead of thinking, he made a bad choice. He may believe he's actually inherently a bad person. In fact, punishment in the Caribbean context might often include not only physical punishment, like beating or getting a slap or something, but it may also include shaming of some kind. Something like beating the child in front of his or her friends or in front of the school, or shouting at them and embarrassing them in front of other people. All of these things may actually lead to damage to the child's self-concept or their self-esteem, not necessarily teaching them what is right from wrong. And authoritarian parents, if you remember the video on parenting styles, are more likely to punish children. Punishment, like hitting, is meant to inflict physical pain and suffering. Punishments don't teach children how to behave. A child who receives a spanking for hitting her sister doesn't learn how to resolve conflict peacefully. Instead, she might be confused and even more angry. Why is it okay for you to hit her, but it's not okay for her to hit her sister? Harsh punishment can cause children to dwell on their anger toward the person inflicting the pain, rather than the reason they got in trouble or how they can do better. It teaches children to be better at hiding wrongdoing in fear of receiving a physical punishment or in fear of feeling pain. Discipline takes an authoritative approach when you compare it to punishment. Punishment is authoritarian, while discipline is authoritative. Remember, authoritative is truly the ideal sweet spot for how to discipline children. Healthy discipline involves giving children clear rules and consistent, relevant, and natural consequences when they break the rules. Remember, natural consequences are really things that would happen regardless of whether or not you were there to tell the child they did something wrong. What would naturally happen as a consequence of a certain action? Like in the first example, if you choose not to eat, naturally you will become hungry. That doesn't have anything to do with whether or not the parent decides you should be hungry or not. That's just nature, that's biology, right? So many discipline techniques involve positive approaches, such as praise and reward systems, because it's not always about what you can take away or what you can restrict. Sometimes it's about where and when to distribute praise or give rewards for certain behavior. Discipline also fosters positive relationships between parents and kids. And quite often, that positive relationship reduces the attention-seeking behavior that we see as so problematic in the first place, and it motivates children to behave in a certain way that is likely to be pleasing towards the parents. While discipline allows for an appropriate amount of guilt, because naturally if you do something wrong and you get caught, you're gonna feel a little embarrassed, a little shameful, it is not about shaming the kids to an excessive degree. It's not about making them feel like something is wrong with them, or that people don't like them, or they're not loved and appreciated. That is a crucial thing to remember. A child who feels good about him or herself is far less likely to make poor choices. And here are a couple scenarios, and you can look at two different approaches to dealing with these situations. You can use the punishment approach or the discipline approach. So a punishment approach here, your child smashes an expensive glass on the floor, so you beat or spank him to teach him a lesson. Conversely, now you have the discipline approach. They smash the expensive glass, so you make them clean it up to teach them that it takes work to keep the house clean. Or if the child is too young to safely be left to clean up broken glass, you take the money out of their allowance to teach them that valuable items cost money and that they should be more careful with other people's property. Next example, your child refuses to do his homework, so you lecture him about it and send him to bed without dinner. Discipline approach, conversely, is that your child refuses to do his homework, so you let the reality of a failing grade teach that lesson of why the homework is important in the first place. Yes, sometimes it may sound harsh, because as parents, usually your instinct is to protect your child from the harsh realities of the world. It's to protect your child from making mistakes. It seems like the ideal to be able to stop them from making mistakes in the first place, as opposed to letting them deal with it afterwards, right? But what if one day you're not there to constantly point a finger, to constantly tell them this is wrong, do this instead? It's better then that they learn from the get-go how to prevent these things from happening, how to do the right thing, why they're doing the right thing in the first place. And now finally, here are 4 ways to practice non-violent discipline with children. Those are just 4 simple ways to try it. First, create a list of consequences. So sit down with your child, make a list of consequences for disobedience or certain bad behavior that both of you agreed to. So you both need to agree to this list of consequences, because it's easier for them to follow the rules when they were part of the process of making them and making the consequences for them. Always explain to your child why they're receiving a certain punishment. Secondly, take away certain privileges after bad behavior. Restrict your child's access to television, internet, social media, or their cell phone for a certain amount of time. Of course, avoid restricting things that are healthy for them, like sports or exercise. Thirdly, reward good behavior. Discipline doesn't always have to be something negative. It's not always about pointing out the bad or pointing out what they did incorrectly or what they could do better. It's also important to reward them when they do the right thing, when they hit the nail on the head. Reward them so that you encourage them to do this particular behavior in the future. It's essentially training them to do more of the good stuff, less of the bad. And lastly, be an example to your child. This is arguably probably the most important one. Children are always watching and learning from what you do. They often imitate the ways in which people around them behave. Once you're a good role model to your child, as you have the chance to right now, they will likely follow your example. They will do what you do. They will emulate you, because more often than not, your child looks up to you. Remember the quote, "Mother is God in the eyes of a child." So model to them the behavior that you would like to see. So in the next video, we'll address how to talk to your children about COVID-19 and some bonding activities for parents and children while you're stuck at home together.